Okay, here we go.
Test, 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 test.
Roll music?
Let's roll it.
Welcome to the Unknown Morning Show.
It's the show where we explore radio,
Podcasting,
TV,
gear,
gearheads,
and making money with a hot mic and other stuff too.
This is the Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley. I know John Moore. I would say KNUE radio legend in Tyler, Texas. How about that?
Well, I don't know about that. You were there when I got there.
I was there.
You were doing nights when I got there.
We had well, I always like to tell people that KNUE in the 90s was the last radio dynasty in Tyler.
That's true.
We had 20 shares.
We had a 29. My last book was a 29 share.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we had it to where I would tell people we weren't arrogant about it.
No.
But we put on our headphones, did the book, and just, it was a machine. But
remember going out in the parking lot behind the station? I don't think you ever smoked, but I'd go out there and smoke, and we would play disc jockey salesman, and we would point at the cars. And it was like salesman, disc jockey. So it was like Jaguar, Cadillac, Oldsmobile.
yeah. Who's driving
So
the rust
true.
bucket?
Yeah.
Oh, that's Chuck.
John's on the air right now. That's his.
Yeah.
It was like Eddie Murphy in Beverly Hills Cop. Remember that
Exactly.
piece of junk Chevy you drove in high school? What are you driving now? That piece of junk Chevy I drove in high school.
I was sitting there kind of working over notes, John. I was thinking about, what to ask you, especially, then and now. I mean, so if we look at then, and maybe I'm wrong, but would you not agree that probably your most successful benchmark, if they say, John Moore he's got to be the morning wake-up call, right?
Yeah, I would say that was the most popular feature on the show.
Yeah, it would be the one that, folks would see you on the street and say, hey, I liked what you did to the person the other morning. What makes a successful wake-up call? Is it just, you have it to where you know something about the person you're calling and then try to work up just something to, give them a little tickle in the ribs at, 6:50 or whatever in the morning?
I think the success of a prank phone call is that everybody in the world is in on the joke except one. The one person. And so that's where your audience comes in and embraces it, because they are in on the joke. And so how do you make a good, successful, likable prank call? Well, I always would say, start calling me at 5:15, because I would get dozens of requests every single day.
Yeah.
And it was always first come, first serve. So I would interview the person calling, it's the wife, it's the husband, it's the girlfriend, or mom, dad, whoever it is. And I'd go, okay. And when caller ID came in later, you did unhook the caller ID, right? Yeah, we unhooked it. It's offline. I'd say,
Wow.
okay.
That was my next question.
Yeah, well, you had to, back then, once it came in. And I would say, well, what do they do for a living? What are their hobbies? Where do they like to go? And what have they done recently that would really bother them if it were a problem? And so I would get that information, and then I would call them up. And if I got an answer and the call was successful, I used it. If not, I would go to the next one on the list. Almost always the first call was successful, because at 4:30, 5:30 in the morning, people are basically in a coma.
Sure.
And so their brain is working, but not well.
And they're irritated, and all they want you is off the phone, and they'll say yes to anything.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much.
Do you have a favorite one that you remember, or one that stands out?
Wow. I did literally hundreds and hundreds of them over the years.
Oh, yeah. Think about the math on that. You did.
Yeah, and you mentioned, and to answer your question, I do have a favorite, and I'll share that in just a second, but there was a lady not long ago, like a couple of weeks ago, came up and started talking to me about a prank call that I had done. Oh, yeah. To this day, it's 30-some, almost 40 years later, and she was talking about a call, and I didn't remember it.
Well, hundreds and thousands of calls.
There were lots of them, and time has gone by.
But isn't that the best?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
it is.
remember you,
Such a
John.
compliment.
Sure, they remember what I did for them.
Yes.
It's almost always, you did this for, it was my brother-in-law, and he's no longer with us, but we still play this tape on his birthday, and that kind of
that's
stuff.
nice.
When I encounter people And I would do this 30 years ago, John, when they would say, we listen, we love your show, we love your station. I would say, thank you so much because I know that you have options. 30 years ago, now those options have just exploded,
Yeah,
It's mind-boggling.
Radio is still a great medium. But there is a whole new generation, especially the younger people, who really, you meet them, they don't even own a radio.
No.
And I found this out during the storms that we had in the spring of 24, all the rain, and it knocked all the power out and everything. And I made a post on my political page on social media, and I said, hey, we've got bad weather coming again. Please tune in to local television and radio for updates on what's going on.
Yep.
And people literally laughed at me and said, how in the world would we do that? We don't have any electricity and we don't have a radio. So people don't even keep a battery-operated radio in their houses anymore.
You know what? I have a couple of boom boxes buried somewhere in my garage. When we had our last set of storms, I was like, oh, we need to get these out because Roseanne and I have the safe place, our closet and everything. But we also have our phones too, which, she'll be dialing up. I'll be dialing up KTBB because we'll be simulcasting with KETK. She'll have Doc Deason on, and we'll be kind of cross-referencing and everything like that to make sure that things
great.
Yeah.
Unless the cell towers go down.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
And the cell towers do go down.
Yeah, and I mean that's a viable thing. I really feel like it's lost on people that is an important thing for disaster preparation. And we learned during what do you want to call it, Snowmageddon a few years ago too,
right.
to have some water in your home.
Well, or at
just
least
in
have a
case.
way to filter your water.
Right.
They make these small hand pump water filters that you can take the nastiest of water and purify it so that you can drink it. Do you have a way to boil water? Do you have those little, portable Coleman stoves that you can buy that now run on propane tanks?
Yes.
They don't even run on fuel, the liquid fuel anymore. But there is a list, and I posted it on my political Facebook page, John Moore County Commissioner Precinct 2 in Smith County. I put a list on there of things that you should have in your house and your vehicle for emergencies.
Makes sense.
Thank you for that.
Keep it on hand. And it came from FEMA. I mean, it's a basic list. You can get it right off the internet from them.
And a lot of those are common sense things that you think about when the electricity is off, large trees are falling in your neighborhood. I mean,
Not on a random Tuesday when you might be listening to this podcast.
Exactly. But yeah, I remember during Snowmageddon, we had 3 weeks. We had the electricity out, but for 3 weeks, we had blown pipes. And we found out it wasn't just the electricity or the pipes; it was getting the pipes fixed because we had, and both Roseanne and I can fix it, and we could, but to get it, we had to wait for the supplies to come in. So it was like 3 weeks of bottled water bathing, which, after about 2 days, that becomes quite the chore.
Sorry, I went on a left turn public service announcement. We were talking about something much more entertaining, wake-up calls.
That's
Oh,
right.
you asked about my favorite.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of a tie. There was a lady, this is back when we had phone books, actual telephone directories. And one morning I had run out of options on calls. People had called in. None of them had worked out. Either they didn't answer or they hung up or whatever. And so I just opened the phone book, and I happened to open it up to the M's, and there were like 15 John Moores
So you called
in
another
the Tyler phone book. So I called another John Moore. And he wasn't there, but his wife was there. And so it was, would you let John Moore know that John Moore called? And by the end, this lady was so confused. I'm not sure what she did when she hung up. And another one was when Viagra first came out, I got a call from somebody who said, well, he's a pharmacist. And so I called and said that I had overdosed.
Oh
dear. Okay.
So your mind can take it from there. I will say this: he was professional until I told him it was a joke and he was on the radio. And then he wasn't professional.
He wasn't?
No.
He did not like the whole concept of you calling him and gigging him a little bit, huh?
Well, why would he?
Oh, well. So, I mean, and we're big on origin stories here, John, on the Unknown Morning Show. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Did you not get your start in Texarkana radio?
Near Texarkana. I got a job. My first job I got on a dare at a small radio station in my hometown of Ashdown, Arkansas.
Okay.
Now, Ashdown is not what you would call part of the Texarkana metro radio market. I don't think Arbitron at the time surveyed that area even, but it's about 15 miles from Texarkana. So technically they could hear the station in Texarkana, although we weren't rated in that market. I started there and then was offered a job. To tell you how old I am, it was a album rock station on the AM dial.
Yeah.
Chuck knows a little about that.
I know a little about it. Being your wily veteran who's been around the block, I remember KCMC. Were you a KCMC, John?
No, I was right down the street from KCMC.
Okay.
They were on Summerhill Road, which intersected College Drive, which was where KTFS was. I left KMLA in Ashdown and went to KTFS, which was 1400 on the AM dial.
I remember that
for about 5 years.
Okay, I remember that for some reason. It stuck in my mind because I know Bobby Bell came to Tyler originally from KCMC back in the day.
Troy, I call him Troy. His real name was Troy. Troy and I actually worked together at KTFS before he went to KCMC.
Okay, so that's probably the intersection.
He worked afternoon drive, and I came on the air at 6 in the evening.
Okay.
And so that's how we knew each other. And so when I was ready to move to a bigger market, I thought, well, he went to Longview, so I'll call him and just see if they have any jobs at Kicks in Longview. And when I got him on the phone, he said, well, I'm not at Kicks any longer. I'm at KNUE in Tyler, Texas. And I remember I said, where the heck is Tyler, Texas?
I've had that experience,
too.
I
knew where Longview was because Highway 59 ran right from Texarkana through there. And so I knew where that was, but I hadn't been to Tyler before.
So you're at KNUE. You make your transition. You get to KNUE. You are in the market for what? Maybe 15, 20 years, John?
Yeah, about that. I went to work at initially I was the sports director for KTBB and KNUE when they were together in the same radio cluster in the same building. And I did that for about a year. I was the head of sports. And KTBB was being sold. And it was being
Stansel? Is that what it was? Stansel?
Yes,
okay.
It was being sold to Stansel and his group of investors.
Yeah.
And Mr. Cheney, who's no longer with us, Don Cheney, called me in and he said, do you want to go? Because I was on both stations. He said, do you want to go with KTBB or do you want to stay here? And I knew that the midday guy, a guy named Mike, was leaving on KNUE. And so I said, I'd really rather stay at the FM and work there. And so I was doing middays 10 to 2 on KNUE for 8 weeks. And then the morning guy got himself fired.
Yikes.
And I got called into the boss's office and told that beginning Monday, this was on a Friday, Monday, I was going to be doing mornings. And I said, is this negotiable? And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, I guess I'm the new morning guy starting Monday then.
Isn't that interesting? We have twists and turns in our career, John, where somebody gets fired, somebody does this, I've said the last 3 jobs that I've gotten has been not entirely my fault at all. Somebody's done something else, and next thing you know, I go, oh, this is in my lap. Well, let's take it and see what we can do with it.
Yeah.
I wonder how many people that's happened to, because I had a similar situation once where I replaced someone and there were kind of hard feelings and I felt bad about it, but it was like, you're going to now do this. And I was like, what if I don't want to do that?
Yeah.
They were like, well, you have 2 options. You can stay here or not.
That's your option. You can not do it, but you'll not do it somewhere else. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That was basically what I was being. And it wasn't a negative thing. Mr. Cheney was not being, harsh about it. He honestly told me he felt strongly that I was the best person to do the morning show. I honestly didn't see it that way at the time. You finally get a day shift. You're working regular hours, and you're thinking, I don't want to keep getting up at 3:30 in the morning every day.
Middle of the day is the best, though. Middays are best.
They are the best.
My current job, I don't have to be in the chair till 9:30. I leave at 6:06. It's great.
What shifts did you work?
Mostly middays.
Mostly middays. Yeah.
I got a couple of morning opportunities over the years, and it was never the right fit. Hence the name of the podcast with Chuck. We filled in once, I think, for Don when he was on
that's
vacation.
That's the story. That's a 30-minute segment there.
Yeah, that one is for sure. But I mostly did middays. I did afternoons at Mix, which was my last kind of stance, and did a lot of severe weather. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it rolls in at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon in East Texas.
I believe Doc would tell us that has something to do with the upper air troughs.
Something along those lines.
I don't know what that means. But
I would say, okay, Doc, because, Doc, he's the weather king in my book.
He is.
He's great.
He's excellent.
He's wonderful at it. So you're at KNUE, you're in radio. Somewhere along the line, okay, right now you're commissioner, and you're our first commissioner, by the way, of any kind that we've interviewed. Our first commissioner.
Oh, well, I feel special.
You are special.
It's District 2, Precinct 2?
Precinct 2, that's
I'm sorry,
correct.
Precinct 2.
No, you got it right. It's Precinct 2.
Okay, so Precinct 2 commissioner. So somewhere along the line, you decided I want to get into the political arena. When did you decide to do that? Or was it something to where you said, this is off on the horizon and this is what I'm going to start doing now to make it happen?
I don't think there was any one moment in time where I said, this is what's going to happen. I think it was a gradual thing. Yeah. My mother's father was on the city council when I was a teenager.
Did you get to watch things?
I didn't. I was working, but since I worked on the radio at the time, I reported what happened in the city council meetings.
Okay.
And so I got to follow it through the coverage of the meetings. I wasn't the one covering it. I was on the air in the evenings when they had them. But my grandfather, I was the oldest grandchild in the family. There's like 30-something of us cousins. They had a lot of children, and then the children had a lot of children. But I'm the oldest grandchild, and so you get told everything first and the most when you're the oldest. And he would say to me over and over, if you're called on to serve by your church or your town, he called it his town, not his community, then you need to answer that call. And that always stuck with me. And then over the years, when I left the radio business, before I left, I had already started a production company, an audio production company,
sure,
which I still have today. And many of my clients were politicians. And so I would learn how they were running and what they were running for and what we needed to focus on. I would write their copy. I would record them. I'd place the buys and all that. So all of that was kind of there. And then I guess back in 2018 or so, I got a call one day from State Representative Matt Schaefer, and he said, I want you to be my senior policy advisor at the Capitol in Austin. And I said, okay.
Wow.
Why not?
Yeah.
Not knowing.
The best offer of the day, right?
Yeah, not knowing it was a really big deal. I knew it was a big deal, but I didn't understand, the real significance of it. So I worked during that legislative session as his senior policy advisor, and part of my role was to go to the committee meetings and sit through the voting, and so I really got to see how the sausage is made in politics, and I got to hear what people said behind closed doors when they weren't out in the public, and you see, I will tell you this, a lot of what you see in public where people are clashing with each other, when they're behind closed doors, a lot of times they don't do that.
That's nice to hear.
They're actually
they're civil.
friends. Yeah, they're pretty civil. Yeah. So I did that during that legislative session, and then carried on for another year or so. I think it was after that, where I was working for him. And while I was in Austin, there was a mixer, which there's a lot of mixers in Austin, and I don't drink, but anyway, I go to them anyway. And so the county commissioner for Smith County at the time, Carrie Nix, was there. And I don't know what spurred me to say this, but I said, if you ever decide not to run, would you let me know? And he said, are you interested? I said, something tells me I need to serve. I'm not exactly sure where, but I've been doing this down here, and I just feel like I've got the ability and probably should answer it if I'm called. Don't know that I've been called yet. Said I would never run against you. You're doing a great job, but if you ever decide not to run, let me know. So it's New Year's Eve of 2020. It's about 11:30 in the morning, and I get a text from him, and he says, are you still interested in running for my seat? And I said, Yeah, I think I am. I'd like to talk to you some more about it. When are you going to announce that you're not running again? And he said, in 30 minutes.
Nice notice, huh?
And I said,
Okay.
I don't think I'm ready to talk about it that quickly. But he said to me, he said, look, if you're really interested, you need to throw your hat in the ring fairly quickly after I announce. And I said, and so I'm still learning how, I'd never run for office before.
Yes.
I had all these other people that I had helped run for office. But I'm telling you, it's very different when you're the person out front.
I can imagine.
It's very different. So I waited about a week or so, and then I announced. And I wound up initially, I think there were 5 other people that said they were going to run for the same seat, and that eventually dropped. 3 of those dropped out. So I ran against 2 other people, and fortunately, the voters elected me, and here I am.
Cool.
But you asked a question, and there was a moment. You said, was there a moment? My wife and I were sitting in our living room watching Minneapolis, Minnesota burn. We were watching the city burn.
Sure.
And I turned to my wife and I said, I have to run for office. At that time, not knowing what office. Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and said, no, you don't.
Yeah.
And she said, I don't want to be married to a politician. And I said, well, I'm not going to make you do anything. It's not you. It would be me. And so she said, well, I'll support you if that's what you want to do. And then Carrie later sent me the text. So it wasn't, one moment, but it was several moments over time.
It sounds like, John, you've had a heart for service and public service most of your life, which I relate to a lot.
Yeah, well, you do a lot of it.
Thank you.
Both of you guys do a lot of it. You have.
I just think the interesting thing about whenever we talk to folks like you, John, and those of us that have been doing this for a while, there's such a long and winding road, and I wish I could do the quote correctly, and I'm doing it off my memory, but as a man of a certain age, I can't. But in the history of the Eagles, they were talking to Joe Walsh, and Joe was saying essentially like, when you lay the book out at its conclusion, it seems like everything is finally crafted where, essentially as it is being crafted, there's a lot of collisions,
Yeah.
And I can't remember the quote exactly, but when I remember hearing it, I go, yeah, because in my radio career, Rosanna used to tell me, you should program. And I was 46 or something. I go, it's for young people. I don't want to do it. I'm doing afternoons at the ranch. I had the mobile DJ service. I was doing 50 gigs a year. I go, look, it's great. It's paying off the house, the property. We're fine. And she'd also been telling me to do news. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me? And I was at BB, my first stint there doing production. I'd been there maybe a year. And Mr. Gleiser said, this is during our weekly meetings, Chuck, you should do news. And I paused. He goes, if you can jock, you can do news. And I go, okay. And that's it. Everything I know about news, watching Melissa Kaiser and John Sims. That's it.
Well, those are 2 great ones to watch.
Oh, and I've told them, and with both of them, one of the great things in working with them both has always been, I could ask questions and they never made me feel stupid. They would explain why. John I remember I would put together a 5 o'clock news package and he would say, okay, never use weather stories because they change. Remember, if it's a 1 o'clock story you're looking at, is it going to change by 6? Keep things in mind. But it was always great watching them and just kind of getting this thing in my mind. How do I do this? Or like now, I do a lot of web work, and I didn't. But when John passed last March 31st, I've had to do a lot of that. And so it's like learning and doing and progressing. And as I always say, learn something new every day at KTBB. Every day,
The thing you have to remember is that those around you see you in ways you don't see you. So they see things just through observation and familiarity that tell them he could do news.
Sure.
He could program. They know this because they know you. But we all have self-doubts.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you mentioned being 46. I was 60 years old when I ran for political office for the first time. So it's like, why would I do that? Most of my friends are headed into retirement.
Sure.
But I don't see myself ever retiring.
Oh,
I don't want to retire.
I'm not going to.
I'm not interested in retiring. So, what is in the recipe for a person and a position? It's like making really good brownies or a really good cake. If you make it correctly, it's going to come out just fine.
Sure.
Every now and then there's going to be, bumps in the cake or saggy brownies or whatever. But as a person, whether you're in politics or you're in radio or whatever it is you're doing in community service, the more you do it, the better you get. I write a syndicated newspaper column, and that's a complete fluke how I wound up writing that. But my 12th grade English teacher kept me after class one day and said, "You have a gift for writing, and you should pursue that." Well, I didn't really. Other than when I needed to write, and wound up doing a blog much later in life, which it turned out the guy who owned the newspaper was reading my blog, and they called and wanted to publish it as a column.
That's what I was going to say. Wasn't that the initial exposure to Tyler Paper, right?
Yeah, the Tyler Paper.
How many places are you syndicated, John?
I'm in 34 papers, I think, now.
Oh, cool.
In 3
That's awesome.
In 3 states, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, but again, it was a complete fluke. I was trying to get my father to jot down his memories of being born and raised during the Great Depression.
Yep.
His father and grandfather were blacksmiths. He grew up in a blacksmith shop next to the railroad tracks in a very poor, small Arkansas town. And he talked about the hobos that would come through and the tramps and the difference between a hobo and a tramp and the stories they would tell. And I was like, you really need to write all this stuff down, Dad. And he would say, well, I've already told you and your sister. I'm like, yeah, but we weren't there. We can't. So I began writing a blog. Someone said to me, hey, you really ought to write a blog. I thought, maybe that'd be a good tool to get my dad to do this. So I began to write it. And then I thought, well, I'm in the paper now. Maybe he just didn't seem interested. And then one morning at 2:46, I got an email from him, and he had written his life story. And he sent it to me. And 2 weeks later, he was killed in a car accident.
Oh, John.
Oh, man.
So all of that paid off.
Yeah.
I got
Persistence.
it. I got his story, and I have them.
That's special.
So, Chuck, you said things happen for a reason. You didn't say it exactly that way, but that's paraphrasing. That's kind of what you say.
It's so interesting when, especially with my dad was a Depression kid. So I would hear things and it was translated in different ways, but my dad's, all of his sport, it seemed like, and I always say this, all of his sports stories ended with, and the bone was sticking out of the sweat sock. Yeah. And essentially what my dad was saying, you don't give up, ever. Mm-hmm. And no matter what sport I was in, and I wasn't great at all. I wrestled in high school, played football, and I'd always tell it, I knew the light bulb wattage of every place in the Gopher Conference, which is a nice way of saying I sucked bad. But, I was in great shape, and it was great being on a team because it builds camaraderie. It builds, you learn how to communicate with people. And if you're wrestling, you stay in great shape. So,
wouldn't you, of course, Mandee's still in phenomenal shape. She's probably the size she was in high school. But wouldn't you like to be as fat as you thought you were in high school?
I was 185 pounds. I would give anything to be that. I am not 185 pounds right now.
I weighed 137 when I was on the tennis team in high school.
Wow.
My left leg now weighs 137.
Oh, my God.
It all changes, and you have a much greater age gives you a greater appreciation for what you didn't appreciate when you should have.
Exactly. I am the product of a wife who's a great cook and experiments. She was sitting there. She made cookies for the staff. We have some here, so remind me after we're done. But she sent cookies to the staff yesterday, and they went insane. It was peanut butter, and she made strawberry cookies.
Strawberry cookies?
Yes.
Yum.
I know, right?
Well, she was workshopping something. She did a cake for BB staff, I think about 7-8 years ago for Christmas, Thanksgiving, and it was strawberry cake. Mr. Gleiser loved it, and she was trying to workshop something. And she goes, okay, I'm going to use strawberry jello, strawberry cake mix it around, and I'll put sugar on it. And I thought, Well, I think that'll work great. And so between, yeah, oh my gosh.
You had me at sugar.
I know, right?
People were hopped up all day, and it worked really well. One of our people, my broadcast partner Jared Jones, he loves Rosanna's chocolate chip cookies. She did it like 4 or 5 months ago, and he said, "I will pay her for those." And yes,
Sounds like she does have a business model going.
she had lab rat everybody else. So, as your rolling commissioner, are you in a situation? Do you think you're going to stay as commissioner? Do you think you'd like to do other things? Senator, mayor, does that seem something that interests you? What do you think?
I ran for commissioner specifically because it is a county position, right?
Yes.
So I'm interested in county government. There are 254 counties in the state of Texas. Every county has a county judge and 4 commissioners. So the job of a commissioner is to make sure that we have a tax rate that is sensible, that is not crazy high or crazy low, so that you have just enough to pay for the county services that you have to provide.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So the state legislature has basically got it set up so that county government is a mini me, right?
Okay.
Of the state government. And often the legislature will pass a law and send it to us and say the counties have to implement this, but they don't send any money with it. So you have to tax at the local level,
okay,
right? Mm-hmm. So I have just felt for a long time that our tax rate is one of the, I think, most moderate that there is for this size county in the state. Our appraisals, that's another story. So people think that the county commission, a lot of people think that the county commissioners are the ones that set the appraisals for their property. We do not do that. That's done by the appraisal district. It is a separate entity. It's not part of the county. So you ask me, do I want to run for something else? I just felt like that this was a significant opportunity to try to keep some of these things in check, because I do believe in government services, but I'm also a constitutional conservative. My grandfather, who was on the city council, used to say, what most Americans need is a good letting alone. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So I'm a big fan of government staying out of my business, out of my house, out of my bedroom, or anywhere else. Mm-hmm. But there are services that need to be provided. The sheriff's office, we have to have protection, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We have to have a jail. We have to have a place to go get our car tags. All these type things are necessary, but they don't need to be overfunded. So, I'm fortunate in that I've owned a couple of businesses, so I've learned how to manage a budget, how to put a budget together, and I've also been a CEO of a 501c3. I've done a lot of this. I've worked for the state of Texas a couple of times. And so I learned a lot along the way. And I've been able to take what I've learned and try to do sensible things so that we pay what we need, but not hopefully more than we need.
Let's not go crazy, right?
Right.
So, John, what took you transitioned out of radio and you went into various things that you just described before becoming a commissioner. What made you say, I think I'm ready to do something where I'm not John Moore on the morning show, where I'm not that public figure anymore? I want to be more of service off the air. How did that transition happen?
Automation.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just saw the writing on the wall and said,
I actually, yes, I did see the writing on the wall. Uh-huh. One of the gifts that the good Lord gave me was the ability to play chess with current events and see where these moves were going to go. And I've been very fortunate in a number of ways in my life. And one of them was, I remember when the internet was a fairly new thing, and we had it at KNUE, and I'm sitting in my office, and I read this article online about this new thing they were doing in Germany called satellite radio.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And I immediately thought, oh, this ain't good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not good for terrestrial broadcast radio. And then when they deregulated the broadcast industry and allowed anybody to own as many radio and television stations as they wanted, I could see that the local was probably going to go out of the business. And then the third thing that happened was when they came up with the software and the automation to pre-record disc jockeys so that they could have 5 people in the United States do all the radio shows.
1995.
Yeah, that's when it
RCS and Selector, they were the big vendors for music software, music logs. And I remember reading the article, it said paperless studio. And I went, oh, get your resume and get everything ready now.
Yeah. So I didn't actively seek to get out of it at that point, but I had a college degree already, and so I had positioned myself so that if I wanted to get out of radio, then I could get out of radio. And to tell you how long ago this was, one day my pager went off. I had a pager because I was divorced at the time and my children were young, and so I had gotten a pager so that they could get a hold of me anytime they wanted. Not many people had my pager number, so I was a little taken aback. I'm like, who is this calling me? It must be an error. So I called it back, and it was somebody I had worked with in radio who had gone to work at Mother Frances Hospital. And the voice on the other end of the phone said, our PR person quit. Me and another person and I told the boss that you're the right person for it. Put on a suit and tie and be here with your resume at 2:00. And I went, tell me what this is again. What are we doing?
Yeah.
And so I went over and I interviewed, and they offered me the job. And I left radio, and I stayed at Mother Frances 14 years.
I thought you were there for a
I
long
was
time
there a long
because
time.
when I first started doing the Radiothon at Mix with Lucky Larry, you came over and helped us out.
Yeah, I did. I felt like it was, you talk about giving back and how much you guys have all worked in the community. There are some charities that I'm very fond of. The Mix Miracle Radiothon, St. Jude. Is
Food Bank.
Food Bank.
People got to eat.
People got to eat. And so I have always tried to continue to do that, even if it's just sending in money and not actually physically going and doing it. But I was at Mother Frances for 14 years, and then you talk about, what political things happened that kind of sent me that direction. One of the people that became one of my clients through my studio business was Larry Smith, the current sheriff. And Larry and I had met in Sunday school back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he came by to see me and said, I'm going to run for sheriff. Would you support me? I said, well, I'll not only support you, I'll help you. Do you, if you want to hire me, I'll take care of all this for you. And so I did. And before it was over with, he said, I'm going to need a public information officer. Would you consider leaving Mother Frances and being my PIO? And I'd always been interested in law enforcement. And so I said, sure. So I left Mother Frances, and I did that for a couple of years. And he got his footing. And the one thing that I learned from working at the sheriff's office was that if you're going to be a PIO in law enforcement, you need to be a cop. And I was not. There was a certain amount of understanding I didn't have because I wasn't a cop. I didn't have my law enforcement credentials. And I actually was scheduled to go to school and get it. And my father was diagnosed with cancer, and him being out of state, and you can't miss more than 2 days during the whole time you're in the school. And I thought, I'm not going to do this because I don't know if I can make all the. So I wound up not doing that, but I just kept thinking, if I'm going to stay in this, I need to be a cop.
What kind of, you were talking school, what kind of schooling, like law enforcement or?
Yeah, there's Kilgore or TJC. You go and get your certification to be a law enforcement officer.
Oh, great. That's cool. So if you would have gotten that,
I would have probably stayed doing what I was doing.
Okay. All right.
But so shortly, I don't know, I was there a couple of years, and my dad was not well. And so I get a message one day that the University of Texas is looking to hire somebody to fill their head of communications position. And so they offered me that job, and I was out there for 5 years. And so anyway, that was when I went to work for Matt Schaefer, and I thought, I should probably run for office. I just feel like I'm being called to do that.
Yeah.
So, But it is very different. Your view of politicians, of course, changes when you go from not being one to being one. The amount of work that goes into political office, I don't think most people have any idea. And I'll give you an example. When I go to church on Sunday, it is not uncommon for 2, 3, 4, 5 people to stop me with some issue they're having either with the road they live on or whatever, and they want to talk to you right then about it. And so that happens wherever you go, if you're in the grocery store, if you're wherever. So it is a job that is, and I'm not complaining at all. I'm just simply saying.
You listen and, you know.
Well, you do.
Absolutely.
You pull out your notepad, you take notes, and you take care of the problem and call them back later. But it is more, people think, most people, a lot of people, I guess, think that politicians have a cushy job, and it's very hard work. If you do it right, it's very hard work.
And
Well, you know,
live
and
and breathe it.
with constituents
to.
too. I mean, I learned as a program director that a lot of times what they want is the contact. They want, and when I mean the contact back. You know, this is a problem that I have with your station. Whatever it is, what is a solution? And sometimes I'd offer the solution, and sometimes it had to do with a piece of programming, and my answer would be, nothing gets in the way of commerce. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd say, but please keep listening. You know, we love to have you, but, you know, this particular point, there's nothing I can do about it, even though I'd love to, you know. But most of the time, I think people want answers, whether it's just, you know, whether you're emailing information back or, you know, calling them. And I would try to, if it was a phone call I could do, I'd usually want to do that so they could hear your voice, you know.
Yeah, most of the time, people just want you to listen to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want to feel heard.
They want to feel
seen.
like they're heard. That's correct. And they want to feel like you care. And they want to feel like you're going to try and help them.
Yeah.
So I almost always say, I hear what you're saying. This is what I heard you say. Is that what you said? Yes, it is, or no, it's not. And I take that down, and then I say, here's what I expect. I expect to be able to call you back within 2 or 3 days. Hopefully with an answer, if not with an answer, with a number of somebody who can help you. And that's how I do it.
That goes a long way.
Sure it does.
It sure, Yep.
Yeah. Most
Absolutely
people
it
get brushed off in life, you know,
Yeah.
or dismissed, or somebody's staring at a phone instead of looking you in the eye and talking to you. And
So I got a call from somebody who wanted to meet about a problem. I'll just say it, the Veterans Administration. Well, obviously I don't have much to do with the Veterans Administration other than I'm a liaison for the Veterans Office. But there was something that had to do with it gave me a question, and I wanted to call the VA clinic here in Tyler. And it rang for 7.5 minutes before I hung up. I never got an answer. And
Well,
so, you know, but it makes you wonder, what are we doing for our veterans?
yeah.
What are we not doing for our veterans?
Yep.
And, you know, if you work for the VA and you hear this and you want to call me and explain that to me, I'd be happy to come back on and explain what you said. But, But 7.5 minutes of no answer, I don't think is acceptable.
Not even
I agree.
Okay, not even the
Recorded automation of
none of that.
leave a message.
Just ringing, huh?
Yeah, it just rang.
Wow, that's crazy.
No answer.
Oh, that's disappointing. My father is a veteran, and he's had various diagnoses most of his life. He was in Vietnam, affected by Agent Orange.
Yep.
Battled leukemia and gone into remission several times. And so we've dealt a lot with the VA. And because he lives in Longview, most of the time the VA hospital in Shreveport. And he's been treated pretty well. But we have heard some horror stories and just seen some really disappointing effects.
I will say a prayer
around
for
him.
your dad.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
That. I really appreciate that, John.
Yeah, my dad was a veteran as well. He was between Korea and Vietnam, and he never used the VA.
Never?
Never used the VA, and I never thought much about it till now.
Yeah.
So
I have an understanding why he maybe didn't.
Well, I just remember him saying, I wouldn't use the VA for any reason. That's all I remember him saying.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. I have another friend whose father served in the military for a long time, and he felt the same way. He sought private care. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And this was 50 years ago, he said this.
Right.
Wow.
Systemic issue, sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I remember somebody saying something about the telephone company back when Ma Bell owned everything. And I was having trouble with something to do with my phone bill. I don't remember what it was, or service or something. And somebody said, somebody said, when you're the only phone company in town, you don't have to know what you're doing. And there's absolutely nothing anybody can do about it.
That is so true.
Yes,
and I'm thinking of so many examples right now that I won't say.
I'm not sure how we got off on that. Sorry about the chasing rabbits.
It's the rabbit hole that we go down, and that's fine. That's the interesting thing. We can freestyle it as we see fit at times here. John, you wanted to mention something, because we've talked about broadcasting and broadcasting, let's face it, and I've said this to folks that I know, that when I hit the market in 1984 from Milwaukee, between Tyler, Longview, Jacksonville, Gilmer, and any of the satellite sub-markets, there were like 10 outlets that if you had to move to a gig, there was many places to go, and it's not that way anymore, and it maybe is a little difficult, but you wanted to mention something about broadcasting in particular, John.
Yeah, I just want people to know that, radio stations are still out there. They're still absolutely free. You don't have to pay to listen to them. And it is a great way to stay connected to your community. But I think it's also true that there are still some job opportunities in the broadcasting business. I mean, Chuck, you're living proof of that.
It happens.
Especially in the smaller towns. When I go through smaller towns when I'm traveling, you'll still find radio stations that have the morning swap shop show.
KMU in Mineola.
Yeah, KMU in Mineola. There's
I love that station.
Palestine.
Yeah.
There are
KYYK.
other smaller stations.
KCKL,
that
Athens.
are still doing it the old-fashioned way. KGAS in Carthage, Texas.
Jerry Hansen.
So, there are still
Marshall
stations
station
out
too.
there.
Yeah,
he has a Marshall station. I don't remember the frequency. Do you remember the frequency of that one?
Was it KG? I forgot the name of Marshall. No, I don't.
A quick internet search and you can find it.
Ashley Dansby is the GM there.
But I do think that there is still an opportunity to serve local markets, and there's still an opportunity to do radio if you want to go into broadcasting. One of the things I learned back when you had to get a license to broadcast on the air, I had a third-class radio telephone operator permit. You remember that, right? I had a third class.
My first is still buried somewhere in my archives.
I don't know where mine went. I looked for it one time.
I found mine a couple of months ago.
But you were taught that a station is licensed to broadcast in the public interest, convenience, and necessity.
Yes.
And there are still some stations who are doing that, and KTBB is one of them.
Oh, yeah. I tell people it's a unicorn. I mean,
it is.
And when folks talk about going to and looking for a radio station, I said, well, okay, if you're looking at a market, start looking for things where they're family owned, and then start from there. That's all you can do. But I've encouraged younger. I have a great nephew who was asking about it. And I said, there's nothing wrong. People podcast. This is before, Mandee, we started doing this. And I said, look, I've got an extra mic. I'll put some software on your computer so we can record. I'll walk you through it and we'll get started. He's a gamer. And I said, go with your passion and start there and just start tweaking it, It's like this. This thing is, our passion is radio and broadcasting, and then we start spreading out. And next thing you know, we're talking about politics. We're talking about cooking or whatever, and it just happens.
Yeah, it was a fun way to make a living. I used to tell people it's like legalized stealing. It's like you got to go in and play,
Sure.
and they gave you money to do it.
I tell friends, look, it's highly possible, and I'm proof of it. You can have fun in a newsroom.
Yes,
we have a great, myself and Jeff and Melissa Kaiser, Roger Gray, and Jared Jones. We have a great time. Kurt Gilchrist, I'm trying to get all the team members.
Don't leave
in there.
anybody out. You'll be in trouble.
Oh, I don't want to. I don't want to get into trouble. We have
He keeps trying to recruit me.
We have a great
should go.
Yes,
You should go.
I told her, I said, you've got a news name. We have a great time in the newsroom. And I think, as Melissa said it once, or more than once, every day starts with a blank slate.
It does.
And the funny thing is, I'm not that person because I like things consistent. And news is not like that at all. So every day we open it up and you ask yourself, what's the story? What is our story? What are the shades of that story? And I'm like, sports too, because I do a couple sportscasts during my show. So during the hour that I'm on, so it's, well, what's the big deal? What are the Rangers doing? What are the Astros doing? And then start building things from there. So I find that really, really, really exciting because for me, it's like, being a music director, instead of Garth Brooks, we're looking at the presidential race. We're looking at what's going on locally. We're looking at what's going on statewide. So I find that exciting too. Kind of terrifying, but also exciting.
Well, and you mentioned news not being the same every day, but take that one step further.
Yeah.
If you're doing a morning show and not just a newscast, you find out quickly when you throw a topic out there what the listeners are actually concerned about. What pollsters tell you that the voters are concerned about is often not what they're really concerned about.
Sure.
They do these national polls, which, raise your hand if you've ever been contacted by one of these polls.
Never.
Womp womp.
Nope.
Never.
Doesn't happen, right? Nobody I know has ever been asked.
Nobody wants my opinion.
But they claim it's all representative of the average voter, whatever that is. And
it's usually about 1,000 people, John.
Throw open the phone lines on a radio station and you'll find out quickly what people actually care about.
Yeah.
Ask them, what's on your mind? And they'll tell you. That's the beauty of radio to me.
And usually if you say that, what do you care about? Well, it's the same thing I care about. Feeding my family, making sure that, this paycheck stretches to this paycheck. And as I tell folks, especially when you look at like ratings periods and things are successful, you go, okay, no more bar-ass hot dogs for another 6 months.
I'm going to get to buy the house brand now.
That's right. I'm going to Hebrew National. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nathan.
But all kidding aside, it's, when folks are wanting to get into radio, look for the family-owned place. Stay away from corporations because, man, it's been a bloodbath lately nationally. I mean, all of the big three firms have been just cutting bodies, and the stories, they're heartbreaking, John. I'll read about, they'll have somebody that's, he's the morning person and the program director on one station, the afternoon person, and the program director on the other. And I'm going, and your problem with that is what? And they're cutting them.
Yeah, and they're letting them go. Paul Gleiser wrote an op-ed in 1995.
Yes.
And I posted this on social media, I don't know,
word for word,
7 or 8 years ago.
Yes.
And the prescience in his prose was absolutely stunningly accurate.
Yeah.
He was completely on point. He knew what was going to happen to the industry if deregulation happened, and it did.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I've got that in my archives at home, yeah. Because, and that's the other thing, too. Many of us got started in the business by, doing Sunday morning programming, football games. Hey, over in that corner,
both of those things.
Football games.
All of the above.
Yeah. Larry King breaks overnight. Me. All of that stuff just to learn a few things, which is how to open the mic and talk without, being scared or running a tight break.
Larry King. I remember that. Chicago. Hello. Yeah, but those were the good old days. I mean, Bruce Williams had a talk show. Larry King had a talk show.
I worked with Bruce's son, Matt, for a while.
Matt.
Over at 99.3, he was doing mornings. We worked together for like 6 months.
Yeah. But the industry has changed, but it is not dead. And so I would simply, I guess the point I really wanted to make is that if you're interested in being a broadcaster, you can still be a broadcaster. And nowadays you could probably buy your own radio station for a not insane amount of money.
There's a lot of moving parts, though.
Oh, there's a horrible amount of moving parts. There are.
I remember working behind the scenes when I was in between radio outfits on the air. I had a non-compete. Mm-hmm. And so I learned how to schedule commercials, traffic.
Right.
And had a blast doing it. It was really interesting because I'd never done that part of it before. I'd been on the air, but I knew how what the outcome was. So it was like backtracking and learning the behind the scenes piece. But I shared an office with the business manager, and we were very friendly. And so she would sometimes talk about the various bills that had to be paid. And I remember my dad joking once, well, you should buy a radio station, or what if we bought a radio station? And I was like, do you realize that you have to pay for a lease for your tower space, that's all federally regulated, that you have property taxes if you own the space? And I'm just talking about the tower here. I'm not even talking about the actual building that you broadcast from.
Sure.
And and I just kind of started going down the list because I'd been paying attention.
Right.
And he was like, oh my goodness. And now you know why Mandee has a podcast and not a radio station.
BMI and ASCAP fees, which can run you $12,000 a month.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If you subscribe, if you want to be in a ratings period in a book, that's like $35,000 a year. And I think for a station, that's the last quote I heard from a long time ago. So
it may be closer to 40 or 50 now.
I wouldn't be surprised. But you can get a low-powered station. You could probably get an AM station and simulcast it on the web, for almost nothing. I honestly listen primarily to the AM dial.
Do you really?
Yeah. Well, I'm in politics, and
That's
where do you
true.
find
News.
where do you find news? It's primarily on the AM dial. So I listen to a lot of AM stations, and they travel a great distance. You can pick up the Dallas station, Shreveport. And at night, I listen to WSM out of Nashville. You can pick up KMOX out of St. Louis. So
pick up the Opry on Saturdays.
Well, they actually have an Opry on Tuesday. They have.
Do they really?
Yeah, they broadcast from the Ryman and different places. Yeah.
You were just saying that. It reminds me, as a kid, I'd listen to WLS
out of Chicago.
At night, I would sit there. John, my first radio gig especially, I would have a handheld recorder, and I'd put it in the grill of my car, and I would record John Landecker's last hour, and then I would take the tape and break it down ear check style, so I could just listen to it and just get into it. Of course, even knowing at that age and that experience in radio that you have to be yourself. It couldn't be Landecker, but still, I was so fascinated with the process that went into that and how that worked. And then, reading about it later in John's book, it was just fascinating stuff.
Well, and Mandee just made the point, there's a lot that goes into a radio station. There's a lot that goes into a radio station's morning show.
Amen.
Or evening show.
Yes.
When I was working on KNUE, I was the sole writer, producer. I was the host. I did the content, everything.
Yes.
I had no one else in the room with me helping me. And when I would see, news stories of Chicago or places where it was unionized, and there was someone who ran the board, somebody who screened the phone calls, who recorded the phone calls, edited the phone call. We did all that ourselves.
Sure.
So there's a lot that goes into it, just like there's a lot that goes into running a radio station. There's a lot that goes into doing it. But I think that was one of the biggest blessings I ever had, was having to learn to do everything, because it taught me, even in politics today, it taught me how to juggle several balls in the air at the same time.
Absolutely.
Or the plate spinning is an analogy I like to use.
And then if you had situations on the air, like if weather breaks.
Right.
I still say, and I've said this to younger folks, that getting weather information was easier back when we had the old teletypes, because it was dedicated to the weather. I could go in and rip it, where now the National Weather Service has things to where sometimes severe weather is here, sometimes it's here, and you have to. It was just easier, back in the day.
Well, the Associated Press is not what it used to be either.
No.
I mean, you had regional. You could even, as an individual at a station, if you turned in a story and you got the byline on the story, you'd get paid for it.
Yep.
Right. I don't know if that's even still a thing anymore. Probably not.
I have no idea, but with and then you had it set up the rough version, and how many newsrooms had it where you had the AP, so you'd rip it down and you'd have your pegboard up with your clips with you would have regional stories, sports, and everything where everybody could go and put it together from that if they wanted to.
I can remember when we had the Associated Press, we had United Press International, separate machine. We had the Texas State Network. We had the Arkansas Radio Network, because I worked at stations that were right on the border.
Yep.
So we had 4 different teletype systems that would come in, and we had to monitor all of them and sort them all out. It was a different time. I don't know if you remember Ricky Nelson, the singer was Ozzy and Harriet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I broke that story when his plane crashed and he got killed. I actually broke that story in Texarkana with Dave Hall. Dave Hall was reporting from the scene, and I broke it on the air and then wound up sending it to the AP. And it was New Year's Eve, 1985. We had a party scheduled at our house, and I never made it home for the New Year's Eve party. I was on radio stations in Los Angeles, New York City, Chicago, all across the country, being interviewed about this.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the networking. The point of that story is that was the networking of local radio and what its power and capability was back in the day. I don't know today. Well, matter of fact, I know that would not be what happens today, because during all the storms we had recently, I was turning on some of the local stations and they were playing music.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty disappointing. When I first got into radio, deregulation had already happened. Mm-hmm. Local radio was certainly shifting. Automation was already in most studios. I happened to work for KYKX. There was Scott Studios automation in the main control room, but I also helped out on the AM station.
Gotcha.
And the AM station didn't have Scott Studios. You were still pushing buttons, and really, we had a reel-to-reel in there for the church service on Sunday. So I came in at a very interesting time where I was still seeing a lot of carts and reel-to-reel, but also the automation was brand new. And I worked with someone that I really highly respect, Paula Prince.
Mm-hmm.
That
good friend of mine.
One of the things that she taught me that you've talked a lot about is the importance of public service in radio. And
Yes.
truly, that's what it would. I mean, when I took mass media in college and high school, took journalism classes, studied to be a writer, did all of that, wrote for the newspaper and yearbook. Essentially, journalism is meant to work with government, to be that watchdog and that balance, and to work in tandem with each other. And radio stations are meant to be a public service. But when deregulation happened, it became so commercialized that, what you're talking about in Tyler and in some of the larger markets too, there's fewer jobs, there's fewer people, and it leads to fewer voices. And what I mean by that is, you don't have the variety of opinions. You don't have local breaking stories like you're talking about. You'll find it on social media first.
Yes, and often it's not correct. And,
right. Because it's not a journalist. It's not somebody with any kind of background asking the questions, right?
And the alleged journalists that I see on the networks today are not journalists.
Correct.
They are almost always, when they do their stories, they're doing an opinion piece.
Right.
Sure.
I was taught, my degree is in journalism, and I was taught that my job as a journalist was nothing more, nothing less than to go out, write down or record what I saw and heard, and come back and relay that to the audience. No one cared what I thought about it. What I thought about it did not matter. My job was to be a reporter.
Right.
That was the job. And now you are very hard pressed, KTBB being the exception, to find, every station in a market, almost without fail, had a news department. It may have been one person, but you would go to a press conference and there were a lot of reporters there. We have press conferences now. We had a groundbreaking for the new courthouse this week.
Yep.
And there might have been 4 or 5 reporters covering that.
One from each of the television news stations?
Yeah.
Right. I don't think there was anybody there from radio.
No.
And I there may have been somebody there from print media,
Yeah.
but obviously I had things I was doing at
Right.
the event, so I was kind of tied up.
And of course, and let me say this too. I mean, let's pretend I'm sitting there and I go and cover that event. That takes time out of me just doing what I have to do. You know, it's
I don't think John meant that critical
no,
of
no,
KTBB
no. But I do
for you
want to
not being present. I didn't hear that at all.
No, because the other thing is this too. It has to do with manpower. It also has to
That's
do.
it right there.
Yeah, totally.
Because at one time it was pointed out to me that KTBB had 5 people in their newsroom at one time. 5, like when Edwards was there, Mike Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there were more than that.
Really?
When
Okay.
when I was working in the newsroom, there were more than that. Yeah, we worked in shifts.
Because I mean, in the KNUE building, it was Edwards. I'm sure you remember Edwards, Bill Markham,
So there
Brian Allen.
There was, yes, Brian Allen. There was Bill. There was myself.
Yeah.
There was Shelley Whittington. Angela worked in there. I mean, there were probably 8 or 9 of us
Wow. Okay.
that worked in news
Yeah.
at the time.
No, what I was going to say, that what drives me crazy, though, is when, and this has nothing to do with what you said, is when I hear folks, especially who are not in radio or broadcasting, and do the blanket condemnation of news. And I always say, well, look, I get it. You know, your major players have their opinion sections, and they're not journalists. They are people that are doing
Correct.
opinions. They're being paid for it, and they're steering their opinion to make money for whoever they're broadcasting for. I don't care who it is. Now, on a local level, we're just trying to do our jobs. That's it. I mean, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for doing your
and
jobs.
I do appreciate everybody who does go out and cover news. I completely understand where you're coming from because I've been there. My point in saying we had 4 or 5 people was, had this been 20 years ago, there would have been 45 people there.
Yeah,
Right,
because that's a
right.
big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, the groundbreaking ceremony is a big deal because that courthouse is going to look unbelievable.
Yeah, and it will be there for probably 150, 200 years. Very long time.
Thank you for that.
Keith Richards may be the only one to see it torn down.
They have the Keith Richards Annex.
We all need to start thinking about what kind of world we're going to leave for him and Willie Nelson.
Willie.
What a thought.
So if you were to, and I'm not sure if this is a way to end this or not, but let's say, John, you're sitting there and you could make a morning wake-up call to anybody, famous or not, okay? Who would it be?
I think it would be Joe Biden because I could do it every single day and get away with it.
Whoa.
Can I say that?
Sure.
I think
just did.
I think I just
You
did.
just
Yeah.
did. And I think I used the term freestyle, and that's about as freestyle as it gets, and that's fine.
Yeah.
This has been another episode of The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley.
This is our show to explore radio
Podcasting.
Gear.
And the gearheads that use the gear.
and making money with a hot mic.
And other stuff in between.
We'd love for you to follow us on social media as well. Follow us on Facebook at The Unknown Morning Show and Instagram at The Unknown Morning Show. See us on YouTube at The Unknown Morning Show.
Thank you for listening to The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
I'm Chuck McKinley. And remember, be kind and rewind.